Hello everyone, my name is Sunavi Brydom. I am the digital managing editor at Free Speech TV. Today I am here with Senator Kevin de León, former Senate President pro tem of the California State Senate, now running for U.S. Senate in California, challenging a little known Senate Democrat named Dianne Feinstein.
That is true.
Thank you for joining us today, Senator.
Thank you for having me.
So before we dive in, I just wanted to give our viewers who aren't familiar with the California Senate bid process a little bit of a primer. Certainly Dianne Feinstein is a fifth-term incumbent, but you and her were both running in the California primary, and California has a system where the top two candidates advance to the general. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's called a jungle primary, and it's somewhat controversial. Some folks like it, some folks don't like it. Historically, like many other states, we used to have what they call a closed primary. Therefore, the winner of the Democratic primary would go on to face the winner of the Republican primary. In this case in California, we have what they call the top two, the jungle primary. So the top two go on to the general election regardless of political party. As long as you get the raw votes to make it to the top two, you're there in the general election. In this case, there were 32 candidates on the June 5th primary. I mean, when you opened up the ballot, it looked like the white pages, literally. There were so many names there. And I made it to the top two. So it's me and the incumbent Senator Dianne Feinstein.
So certainly, you're challenging the establishment, an establishment figure who has been, loomed large in Democratic politics for quite a while. What do you say to folks who say that, that perhaps we need an experienced, politician in Washington to represent the Democratic Party? What do you say to folks who say that, well, she's got the money, she's got the name recognition? What is your response to folks who
I think there are a lot of voters in California who would like to see a change. They want new, bold leadership in Washington that represents their values, not leadership that's on the sidelines, but rather on the front lines, leadership that moves forward with a lot of passion, and not passivity, not complacency, not someone who seeks or asks for patience, or with this current president, Donald Trump, perhaps with the hope that in the future he could be a quote-unquote good president. I think that we have made some incredible strides. We made it into the top 32 candidates. We navigated a huge field. Secondly, I have the honor to have earned the endorsement of the California Democratic Party, and this was a huge stinging rebuke, but also at the same time a really proactive, move forward with a lot of Democrats saying it's time for a change. And you are right, we were outspent on a 10-to-1 ratio. I'm not a multimillionaire, or in this case a multi-billionaire. She loaned herself close to $10 million, but you know what? Our politics, our campaign is powered by the people as opposed to power and money.
And speaking of that money, I understand that you have committed to not accept a dime from fossil fuels. Are there other organizations or areas that you're not taking money from?
Pharmaceutical companies, for example. Another example would be for-profit private prisons. And what they're doing right now, especially with young immigrant children all over the country, but especially in the Southwest.
Yes. Well, and certainly immigration has been a key crux of your campaign. You've spoken, I believe you held an abolish ice cream social. We
had paletas,
Perfecto, okay.
Yeah.
So certainly, we're seeing this administration launch not necessarily unprecedented, but very vicious and targeted attacks on immigrants of all stripes. But in previous interviews, I've heard you talk about frustration that Congress can't seem to pass any kind of immigration reform, even when Congress was, both chambers were Democratic and we had a Democratic president. And speak a little bit about how dreamers are kind of the low-hanging fruit, in that, sure, everyone can say that kids who were brought here as children, I guess we can give them a chance. I think we're seeing some of the same thing with children in cages right now, right? It should be, in my mind, easy for folks to understand that we shouldn't put children in cages. But I'm interested if you have ideas on how we kind of disrupt this narrative of the good immigrant versus the bad immigrant, where, well, children are innocent, but we're not even going to talk about their parents, who were oftentimes fleeing. There's a saying that you don't leave home unless the journey is safer than staying where you are. So I wonder if you have ideas for how, particularly as a person of color, as a Latino, how to disrupt that narrative if you get to Washington.
Well, let me say this. This is an issue that I take very personally. As the youngest child of a single immigrant mother with a third grade education, my mother worked her fingers to the bone. She was a housekeeper. She spent the vast majority of her life cleaning other people's homes, and she was a hotel worker as well. And it was through my mother that I learned the value of hard work and her strong work ethic. She was a woman who put the roof over my head, the clothes on my back, and the food on the table. So obviously I take this very personally. Now, in terms of new ideas and bold ideas, I don't think it's so much about bigger, better, bolder ideas. I think it's an issue of leadership and the courage of your conviction with regards to normalizing the legal status of millions of hardworking families who have been here 10, 15, 20, 25 years, who have paid their taxes, who have played by the rules, who have pledged their allegiance to the red, white, and blue, but have been unable to normalize their legal status because you have a Congress that's been absent, a Congress that has lacked the courage and the leadership. And there's obviously a lot of blame across the board in Washington, D.C. So when folks talk about let's cut a deal to protect, let's say, the dreamers, but at the same time they say, well, but we'll deport their parents. That makes no sense. I mean, we have dreamers, we have TPS, we have those who seek political asylum, then we have the millions of folks who've been here decades who have yet to normalize their status. So this is not rocket science. This is about leadership and demonstrating that leadership and encouraging your conviction to normalize the status of these folks and finally get this issue off the table, because what we have witnessed today is a president that will do everything within his power for electoral gain, for electoral means, to scapegoat immigrants, particularly immigrants of color from their own Western Hemisphere, from the Caribbean, from Africa, from other Pacific region nations. And he's doing this for his own electoral reasons. So when folks talk about, say for example, abolish ICE, I haven't heard a lot of folks talk about even abolishing the Border Patrol or even abolishing the FBI or the DEA or the ATF. Very specific to ICE, because ICE was created to focus on those who sought harm on the United States, terrorists, for example, cyberspace pedophiles, human traffickers, drug traffickers, gun runners, gun traffickers, not mothers and fathers, mothers who selling tamales or fathers selling paletas on a street corner. This is an agency that has become highly politicized and weaponized for the political purposes of this White House.
And so, just you come from California, which is certainly, exactly, California. Certainly, I think there is some perception that California is the far left coast. It's a state with a Democratic supermajority. But what do you think that your experience leading the California State Senate can bring to D.C. when you're talking about this, very, left-leaning, progressive state, then being brought into Congress, having to work with a hostile White House that is pretty hostile to a lot of those ideas. What is your stance, I suppose, on that kind of, mitigation or cooperation, or, kind of what does that look like?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I can say this, is that California is a progressive state, no question about it. It is an overwhelming Democratic state, but we have quite a few Republicans too, and people forget that California sent two Republican presidents, Richard Nixon as well as Ronald Reagan. Right. So it's not always been left, it's not always been progressive. And I've worked very closely with Republicans in California to reach deals that really move policies that improve the human condition for everybody across the political spectrum. Policies that we have moved in California, some folks narrative-wise may qualify them as very far left. I view them as very common sense. Moving forward, progressive climate change policies that grow the economy, put people to work, at the same time reduce harmful greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide emissions. Moving forward, policies such as protecting our immigrant families. To me, that's common sense. Raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Moving policies such as equal pay for women doing equal work, which helps grow this economy. Those are common sense measures that, unfortunately, with the Washington media and the national media, gets characterized as left or far left. I view them as common sense. When you talk about the issue of Medicare for all or not Medicare for some, It doesn't make a difference to me if you're a Donald Trump supporter, a Bernie Sanders supporter, or a Hillary Clinton supporter. Healthcare is healthcare, period. So I don't view these as far left issues. And the ability to roll up your sleeves and engage at a personal political level with Republicans in Washington, D.C., that's nothing new to me. You know, I think there is a difference in terms of collaborating with Republicans when you vote 60% of the time to confirm the federal judges from the White House, from this specific president, who have will have a lifetime term on the bench, deciding on critical cases such as a woman's right to choose, issue of immigration, labor rights, civil rights, voting rights, or environmental laws. That's a little different in terms of collaboration and cooperation. You want to lead from a position of strength. And in this case, because Democrats are in the minority, and you have a very unique White House, you don't have a Jeb Bush, a John Kasich, where there is space to negotiate. And when there's not space to negotiate, then you debate your ideas. You even fight your ideas within the parameters of normalcy. This is abnormal. So you need to resist, and resist with results with this president.
So my final question, you've had some great success in California pushing bills for clean energy. And particularly I was interested in your framing of that as an economic advancement issue in terms of creating jobs in clean energy to decrease the unemployment rate in California, you know, find good paying jobs for folks of all stripes. But how do you make sure that that kind of initiative doesn't pollute or harm Black and brown communities that are often kind of at the center of places where these, you know, innovative policies take place, but then it displaces folks or, you know, creates environmental harm?
That's a very good question, and that's a very legitimate question. I think historically the environmental movement, perhaps at the national level, has been maybe a little insensitive with regards to the disproportionate impacts of greenhouse gases as well as other criteria pollutants, NOx, SOx, particulate matter 2.5, and the devastating consequences on Black and brown communities, the environmental justice space, if you will. In California, I moved the measure which takes 25% of all cap and trade auction revenues, and we're talking about hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. We invest this money in communities that are disproportionately impacted by climate change and criteria pollutants. We invested in energy efficiency, weatherization, bundling rebates so poor families, working families can purchase an electric vehicle, because your financial wherewithal should not dictate if you have access to the latest and greatest and cleanest technologies. Obviously, those who have the most energy efficient homes, distributed generation, energy storage, electric vehicle, charging station, tend to be those of a high educational attainment, of high means. They have the ability to sort of do the research necessary. They know what they want. You have to move policies with intentionality to improve the human condition. In short, you democratize your climate change benefits. So everybody, regardless of who they are and where they come, can benefit from these types of progressive policies.
That sounds like it might even be an appealing proposal for, you know, fiscal conservatives.
I think so too. I think what we've done in California, we have successfully decoupled the linked carbon from GDP, which means we have actually grown the economy. That's a good thing. So if you're a conservative, don't you want to pay less out of your pocket for utilities, at the same time have a high wage paying job in the renewable space, in the clean energy space? It's a win-win situation. So these are the common sense policies that we have been successful in California, and I hope we're given the opportunity by the voters to export these values to Washington for the entire nation.
Wonderful. Great luck in November, and we hope to see more of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.